Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry for that slight delay. There were some technical issues over here, but welcome to the New York, or it's not New York, it's the symposium. I'm Diane Sayre, and I am running for U.S. President, not U.S. Senate. And I'm going to be joined this evening by Bob Baker, who is a farm leader and writes for Executive Intelligence Review, has been a longtime LaRouche associate for many years. And what we're going to be talking about is a sane farm policy for America and some history of this. We are on the cusp of a major well, we're really in it already, but 56 farm organizations just sent a letter to the Congress about the situation that they are facing. It's completely untenable. We don't have parity pricing. We also, by the way, are importing an enormous amount of food, which is absurd. We have plenty of land in this country which could grow food. Otherwise, just by way of the strategic situation, as many of you saw, I held a press conference yesterday with Scott Ritter. He was the first weapons inspector on the ground in Votkinsk in the Soviet Union in 1988 after the 1987 signing of the INF Treaty. And yesterday, the New START expired, meaning for the first time in over 50 years, there are no limitations on arms production. This is particularly dangerous given the insanity of the current world, at least Western world leadership. I don't think President Putin or Xi Jinping or President Lula of Brazil is insane, but certainly the top of the political pile in the United States is not in good shape, as could be seen from the recent Epstein file dump. Certainly not in the UK, and certainly we're going to be looking into more the connection of the British royals to this whole apparatus, something that they've been quite silent about. But before I go any further, let me bring in Bob Baker. Hi, Bob. Welcome.
Hello. Glad to be here.
I do have your slides, by the way. I don't know what order you want them in.
I have the order, but
okay. Yeah, so just we'll pull them up when you need them, and if it's not the right slide, you can tell me to go to something else.
Yeah, sure. Well, here's the thing. I'll just jump right in here because anybody who's connected to agriculture and the family farm know that we're in big trouble. And the family farm as an institution, which is absolutely a vital institution for the longevity of our nation, we must keep that. And in my discussion tonight, I want to emphasize that we need to be focused on a program for 1 million new family farms. Now, that sounds like a lot of farms. And, you know, there's to get that done, we have to get a lot of people in the urban areas to support that kind of an idea. But if we don't get that done and we don't set up the instruments and the technology and make the types of infrastructure arrangements we need to do it, then what we're going to have is very few farms, and they're going to be in the control, directly or indirectly, of massive international global corporate structures. And if you spend any time at all listening to the World Economic Forum discussion regarding food, you might have picked up that they'd like to see the population reduce in the world in many areas. And of course, when you analyze the whole net effect of the ag policy that we've had, you can see we are moving in a directionality that will not support the population that we're going to have. And part of that's got to do with the infrastructure breakdowns that are now unfolding, and the fact that we don't have the in-depth skills in our workforce or in the infrastructure to maintain the types of transportation grid, all the manufacturing, and even the financial speed at which we need to run things. So, what we've got is a global situation, and this is not just in the United States. We have the United States, just to start off with where we're at. The current, most recent indication is that the USDA says we have about 1.89 million farmers in the United States. And they say 98% of them are family farms. Well, that's depends how you define the family farm in this day and age. But when you start to analyze that 1.9 million family farms, what you find is that about 10% of those farms are producing about 85% of all the production. And that means, we could get all our farmers in several football fields. And that's not a very good thing when you think about it. But it also means that if that small group of farms and the infrastructure they need to maintain themselves gets in a financial crisis or even weather, different things, the nation is very vulnerable because the food needs to be moving. And I know right now they even talk about millions and millions of head of cattle are sitting in trucks going up and down the highway every day. So the thing that we got to start thinking about is what is the significance of that family farm, that concept, that idea. And it's much more than just, a husband and a wife and a family sitting on the farm. It is an institutional, cultural apparatus and beautiful process of intellectual ideas that we need to maintain the idea of a republic. And when we step back and we look at country after country in Europe, in Greece, in the U.S., in South America, all the family farms are being hit very hard. I'll just stop there for a moment, Diane, if you have any comment.
I just think this point that you're making right now is really important because it's not our country versus another country, although we do have bizarre policies, for example, where I think part of the trade deals is that President Trump was saying we have to get the people in England and the people in India to consume more American beef, which is crazy. Why do you want to ship perishable food halfway around the planet when people can produce it there? And you mentioned Davos, you mentioned maybe you could just say something about how it came to be. I think the World Trade Organization had a major role in this, where we used to have an emphasis on food self-sufficiency. And in fact, there was a whole project for that after FDR. And that was the actual green. What did they call it? The green something or other, but it meant food self-sufficiency. It didn't mean solar panels and windmills.
Yeah, they called it the Green Revolution. And the guy who gets credit for that is a vice president under FDR called Henry Wallace. And the Wallace family is they're very representative of what we talk about in terms of, let's say, the family farm, but the culture, what do you mean by culture in agriculture? And that's much more than just, everybody kind of doing their family farm thing. It's a very, very significant intellectual idea because it has to do with whether or not citizens will develop themselves so that they can defend the republic, so that they are not up against various things. Maybe I don't know if you could pull up this one slide. It's in the Henry Wallace section. Let me see. I think it's I got it here. It's number one in the Henry Wallace section. It's actually a quote. Vice President Henry Wallace.
Is this one? It's not this one, is it?
Yes.
Okay.
So as you can see, Henry Wallace is quoted as saying, "They claim to be super patriots, but they would destroy every liberty guaranteed by the Constitution. They demand free enterprise, but are the spokesman for monopoly and vested interests. Their final objective, towards which all their deceit is directed, is to capture political power so that using the power of the state and the power of the market simultaneously, they may keep the common man in eternal subjection." Now, I don't know if anybody's ever thought about that kind of thing, but I'm starting to think there's a whole lot of people that have thought that concept through in the most recent time, because that's what you've got. We've got monopolies that are growing and disintegrating right in front of our eyes. And that process is what our founding fathers gave us a republic to defend from, that kind of a policy. So so now I bring that up in terms of that's Henry Wallace. And Henry Wallace, if you Diane, if you can find slide number well, gosh.
Tell me what's on it, because I don't have any numbers.
It's the three Wallace, the father, son, and grandson.
This?
Yes. Okay. Now the reason I'm putting these three, they're all three named Henry, and I'm going to just give you a little background on them. But the reason is because this is I'm using this as an example to understand the family farm idea, but also the idea that Benjamin Franklin told the lady when he came out of the Constitutional Convention. She said, "What kind of a government do we have?" And he says, "Ma'am, you have a republic if you can keep it." And you see, that's where we're at. We're at that if part right now, because the monopolies that we see everywhere, this is what we fought a revolution to get rid of. Now I'm going to go through Henry I, the gentleman on the right. And he grew up in Pennsylvania on a farm, became a Presbyterian minister, and in the Civil War, he was General Grant's chaplain. He rode to Appomattox with General Grant. After the Civil War, he went to Iowa and started working at a couple churches and ended up buying a farm and became very, very active in Iowa economics and political, especially around the Iowa State University. He also, his second son, Henry II, the middle, he was the Secretary of Agriculture under Harding, President Harding. And he convinced President Harding to go with a parity pricing structure for agriculture. Unfortunately, President Harding died before he got that put in place. But what the Wallaces did is they brought this kind of discussion into a process in the USDA, the idea of economic development and developing the creativity of the minds of not just the farmers, but everybody in the rural community, so that the rural community became a rock solid cultural base for the whole nation to stand on in terms of a resource for creativity and economics and engineering and production, and in particular food. Now, Henry II in the middle, he and his wife were very, and the whole family, if you read them, had a very high orientation towards helping the community, doing the good. And they worked with helping young kids go to college if they wanted to. And in one case, they went to church one morning, and there was a young black lad, and he was a very good singer. So Mrs. Wallace asked him to join the choir, and they got to know him. And they eventually invited him. He needed a place to stay. He was poor. His parents were slaves. And they invited him to stay at their house. And that's where he did. So he went on to college at Iowa State University in botany. Now, Henry III, the young man, he grew up in that environment. And here he's got a young lad who's going to college. And he says, till the end of his day, that he developed him. They became his best friend. And that young lad studied botany a lot. And he'd come home on the weekdays, and he would take young Henry out in the field, and they'd walk around, and he'd teach him about the plants and how they grow and the various types of systems that are necessary. And what ended up is young Henry was so moved by that he started raising seed corn in his grandfather's garden in Des Moines, Iowa, in the background, big garden. He ended up developing what became the first commercial seed corn ever developed, and it is today known as Pioneer Hybrid International, the biggest seed corn company in the world. Now, you don't hear much about that with the Wallaces. Now, that's just one thing I'm saying that comes out of this combination of people, okay? So you got the original Henry I, Grant's chaplain. He was also put together a special weekly publication called The Wallace's Farmer. Sound kind of familiar? So they had a communications system that they put out, and it came out every week. And so they wrote about agriculture and modern scientific growing of crops. Now, that's the first Henry. Here it is, The Wallace's Farmer. So they still publish it today. Then the second, and Henry I was instrumental because he publicized it through his Wallace's Farmer, getting McKinley elected.
Wow.
And McKinley offered Wallace the first one, position of Secretary of Agriculture, and he turned it down. He said, "I'm worth more to you in the position I'm in." But he recommended his best friend, a guy named Jim Wilson from Tama, Iowa. And so he made him the Secretary of Agriculture. And he was Secretary of Agriculture for 14 years, the longest of anybody ever. He was a Wallace associate. Henry II, standing in the middle, he became Secretary of Agriculture about 8 years after Jim Wilson retired. And about 8 years after Henry II was no longer Secretary of Agriculture, FDR became president and asked Henry III to be the Secretary of Agriculture. And to this day, Henry III is known as the greatest administrator the USDA ever had. He set up the Soil Conservation Service, Extension Service, all kinds of programs. They measured and mapped out every acre of farmland in the nation. Massive project. And not only mapped it out, but went through on each acre and showed where all the different soil types were on that soil. Now, the reason I'm saying these things is to give people some sense. When Diane is running for office, Jose is running for office. We've got a history of organizing for over 50 years to have these kind of discussions and policy. But what you have is manifesting, and that's why I'm using the Wallaces as an example. They took their citizenship very serious, and they conveyed that to other people. They wrote a lot. They wrote magazines, and they organized, and they went and talked to people. And so, and not just, about nothing. They were talking about the highest levels of science, plant growth, agriculture, machinery, tractors, whatever it was. But the idea is to do it in such a way that the farmer could stay in business and develop a whole family, a next generation who would be economically at a much higher level and also intellectually at a much higher level. And in that process, that's where they developed the whole science behind what is now called parity prices for agricultural products. And parity price means a price that the farmer can get so he can pay back what it costs to buy the inputs to produce the food and make a living also. But you see, what we've got today is we've got exactly what we fought a revolution to get rid of. It's called the marketplace. And the marketplace is beat into us from every college in the country. But the thing that we should be focused on is how do we keep the people in a decent standard of living and intellectually inspired at the same time.
Bob,
yes.
Would you care to tell us who was the young man who took Henry Wallace under his wing?
Well, there's a picture there of a young guy just standing. You maybe you see that. He's
a young guy, but I don't know. I have two.
Yeah, right there. That's him. Now that's the young black lad that the Wallaces brought into their house, and he lived there just like a brother, like a son. And then later he grew up and graduated, and he worked and chored. He helped different people do all kinds of stuff. But when he graduated, he was offered a job to go to a place called Tuskegee Institute. And he went down there and became one of the most famous botanists and plant scientists in the world. And his name was George Washington Carver.
And he discovered everything about the peanut.
That's right. He actually did, I think, over 110 different things with the peanut. And but he was all, if you read anything about George Washington Carver, what jumps out is just what a gentle, beautiful person he was, always trying to help other people. And of course, that is the orientation that we should have with the economic policy that we're talking about. That should be the orientation of why farmers should work together to reestablish the American system agricultural policy, the idea that, you could, with parity-oriented prices, you can support your family and not feel like you got to compete with the biggest monopolies halfway around the world. So
I
go ahead.
since you brought up Carver, George Washington Carver, as you know, and I think you and your wife also had spent some time in Tuskegee with the legendary civil rights movement heroine Amelia Boynton Robinson, who was a very dear friend of Lyndon and Helga LaRouche and passed away a few years ago. But of course, she knew Carver, and we met a wonderful history teacher there named Woodson, Professor Woodson, who also was a student at Tuskegee when Carver was walking the campus, was a professor there. And Professor Woodson always told us how disappointed that Carver was that he was not becoming a scientist.
Nah.
When he said that he would come up to him and say, and he had a very high voice, and he'd say, "Young man, what are you studying?" And he would say, Professor Woodson would say, "History," and then Carver would say, "History, history. Well, I guess maybe you'll make something of yourself." It was very. And he also told us about an assembly at Tuskegee that Carver called everyone together and said to the students, which other people have heard, but it just was so striking to hear it, that God gave y'all one mouth and two ears. You're supposed to listen more than you talk.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. Well, it's interesting because Marsha, my wife, found out that his secretary, who was a guy, drove him around a lot. That whenever they went on a trip, that he always sang this song, and he always sang the same song. I actually think it'd be a good street song if we worked it up a little bit, but and it was called "Done Done." You can just Google it up, and it, I don't want to destroy it, but it goes, "Oh, I done done. Oh, I done done. Oh, I done done. I done done what you told me to do." Then he goes on and says all the things that God told him to do. Okay, now moving into this discussion, you might see we've sort of walked through a lot of different things. And you notice tremendous science connected to it all. You take a poor young black lad who's, working at the local laundry, and all of a sudden somebody picks up he can sing, plugs him into a chorus in the church, opens up a relationship, brings him into their home, develops his mind, helps put him through college, and he becomes one of the greatest scientists in the world and motivated many other people. That's what we're doing. That is what we're doing. And then you see the Wallace family. They in the USDA. I mean, my God, Henry Wallace for 8 years, the third one. I mean, agriculture. It was in the Depression, and he, because of his knowledge, helped organize and brought into play the machinery necessary to put in parity prices. And it was a fight and a half, but they did it, and it worked. And they stabilized. They said, FDR announced no farm foreclosures. Anybody going to get foreclosed, call the White House, we'll stop it. The point is we're going to do, and they refinanced all the farmers in 1 year without a computer. And see, that's indicates the power of government if it's working for the people. And that's why, and so Wallace with the Soil Conservation Service and the put in terraces and ponds and just put people to work all over the place. And that's what we're going to do with the policy that, Diane's talking about. That's what we can do with a new credit bank, uh, reorient the credit so that the credit becomes something usable rather than just debt by speculators that makes nothing. And but you see, this is what we're seeing now. When you look at the farmers protesting in Europe, it's big. You look at the farmers protesting in Mexico and South America, it's big. These are farmers in Europe. And there's just thousands of European farmers rallied around in Strasbourg, France, at the European Parliament building, insisting that this European Union and Mercosur deal be scrapped. And
what deal? Oh, the Mercosur deal.
yeah,
What is that deal?
that is like, well, here in the United States, people have heard of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. That was the joint agreement with Canada, the US, and Mexico to make it easier for people to buy and sell commodities across the borders. But what it really did, it saddled everybody up to the pricing structure that gets dictated out of Wall Street and the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. Now, this one is a similar type arrangement between farmers in South America, Mercosur, and farmers in the European Union. And so now all of a sudden, everybody's going to be competing against the people that can produce everything the cheapest. And, having cheap things is not necessarily the best way to have your economy function, because the nice thing that they've proven scientifically with parity pricing is for every dollar that comes into U.S. agriculture, and they've done studies on this, 7 or more dollars go back because of the money turns over multiple times back into the population. So it's one of the most powerful ways to stimulate an economy is through a proper agricultural pricing structure. Now they're protesting because it's going to destroy the farms even more. And that's the purpose of these free trade policies. It's so that you end up, and you saw it since we started them, everybody talks about the globalism, the mega corporations, and what do we got? We got less farmers, we got less everything. So where's all this stuff that was supposed to help everybody out? And see, that's where LaRouche jumped on this right as soon as, they floated the dollar and Nixon pulled the plug on the dollar in 71. And he said, this is going to lead to fascism. He said it's going to lead to monopolies. And it's like that slogan I read to you that Henry Wallace said. It's monopolies, it's fascist. It takes away the sensitivity of the population towards each other, towards humanity, and it replaces it with just a, survival of the fittest attitude. And, if you don't make it, that's just business. That's just good business. Somebody's got to take a hit.
Right. I mean, it's so outrageous because they really bludgeoned people. I mean, I'm thinking of some of the poorer countries like Haiti, which were they not either food self-sufficient or close to it after the Green Revolution? But then my understanding is the World Trade Organization or somebody came in and said, no, you need cash crops. You have to produce coffee or coca or whatever, cotton. You should not grow food here.
Yeah.
You should import your food. And they really created a mess. Also, if you could say something about these big mega farms, because it seems to me that there's a great danger, similar to when Monsanto gets a patent on a particular seed. If you have all your livestock in one place and you get a disease, God forbid, or something else, it seems like the whole thing could get wiped out.
Yeah.
And we don't, I mean, part of the reason to grow your food locally is that it's fresh, it's diverse, it's, but please, why don't you say something about that?
Yeah. Well, you see, and you hear it in the news. You hear about John Deere and the big machinery companies. So, they're thinking about going to Mexico. Because why? Because labor's cheap. Well, it's interesting when you look at what we got today. And again, this is a direct result of this whole globalization process. You have two companies that make 88% of all the tractors in America, the big tractors. Two companies, Case IH and John Deere. And John Deere does 53% of that. In combines, you have two companies that make 90% of all the big combines in the U.S. Two companies. Now, with the
tell me, what is the difference between this and communism?
Well,
so freedom.
Well, yeah. Well, see, this the point is people are starting to realize it because, like, you take for instance John Deere, and they're in court, but they put out contracts. The farmers used to fix all their machinery if they could, but they put it out so you can't. You even got to sign a contract, and then if you do have somebody come out, you may have to wait several days or even weeks. In the heart of harvest, you could lose millions or thousands of dollars, so
that's called right to repair, isn't it? Or right of repair, that people should be able to repair their own equipment.
Yeah, that's true. And so then you put in the idea with this policy. We don't have young farmers. I mean, today is really serious for several reasons. One is they're seeing the struggle that the older generation's having just to hold it together. But for agriculture across the board, I'm not saying for just a handful of the big, but across the board, almost every farmer today has one or two outside incomes to make it. And there's even USDA reports that show even one period, 1917, and I think 4 years before that, the income from agriculture was actually negative, and the income from off-farm income was real high. But then when they report it as average farm income, then it looked really good. But the point is this is why we need a discussion about the family farm. The family farm is an institution. It's what is it? You take a piece of land, the land doesn't move. People come on it. They develop a living. It's not just to have a place to raise your family. You develop relationships with neighbors. And a farm business needs supporting carpenters and metal and machinery and mechanics and everything, water, plumbing. So it's just a tremendous diversified business. And, if you want to develop creativity, there's probably not too many places better than to bring up a child on a farm, just because of all the different sciences that you got to work with, weather, seed, biology, animal life, and that kind of thing. But But you see, with the idea we're talking about when we bring up the idea of 1 million new family farms, see, we're folding in all this cultural aspect of what that means because it's important. It's not just to make money. The point is to develop a solid. And I think about you know people that came in from immigrants early. When Lincoln put in the Homestead Act, they came over and they could farm, get 160 acres for buck an acre. But the thing is what did it do? Well, the people that came over, they started building farms. What's a farm? It's a business, but it's a cultural anchor. And then they started building communities and churches and other things. And all of a sudden, you have a whole culture developing there, and you have music, and you have singing, and you have people, a place where people can come together to develop psychologically and mentally, but it's around doing the good. And that's what we're talking about in terms of getting back to a policy. It's going to safeguard the food, safeguard the institutions that are necessary to make it work, and develop a whole institutional base in the rural communities that is rock solid anchor for the rest of the nation to look to and stand on and have food.
Exactly. Now, since we're about 3/4 of the way through, perhaps we should say something about what should be done about this. And I think maybe we'll start with this slide that you sent over, because the question of the economy is obviously crucial. There's nothing that you're going to do that will be right about any of this if we don't have a sane economic system, if we don't get rid of the Federal Reserve and have a national bank, if we don't separate the banks according to function by reinstating the Glass-Steagall Act, and then, as you say, American credit system, which is like Hamilton did, you invest in those things that increase man's power over nature, that increase the productivity of your workforce, and you have a science driver, fusion and space exploration. And of course, you probably are well aware that Hamilton had a big debate with the agrarians in the United States. He wrote his Subject of Manufactures in part to address that, because they were saying, well, the wealth comes from the land. Everything comes from the farm. And he was arguing for manufactures. And what became clear in his argument and in reality is that if you invest in manufactures, which means advances in science and machinery, your farms become infinitely more productive. And I think people would find it interesting if you could say something about some of the technology available today. And also, you used to have a term called the space farmer, which I thought was rather delightful. And tell us some of what can now be done with modern technology, which I think can be a great benefit.
Well, I like that term called the astronaut farmer.
Oh, astronaut farmer.
Yeah, because you think about when we were young and we were being told about the inside of a space capsule, and the guy's sitting there, and he's got all these buttons and computerized things, and of course, heck, your little smartphone now will do about 100 times or more than that space capsule could do. But the thing is with the modern technology, and modern farmers, they know this. In their tractor cab, they have so much electronics that connects them to the satellites, and in ways that they can hook up their machinery, and they can monitor all the different processes on a piece of machinery. Let's say a corn planter. And let's say you got a 24-row corn planter, and you can tell how many seeds are coming out of every row that's planting those seeds. and an alarm will go off if it's wrong. But you also have the satellites hooked up to a GPS system that is hooked in to steer the tractor in a straight, perfectly straight line, so that you can actually, the tractor will drive from one end of the field to the other and plant perfectly straight rows and turn around and go back. Now, there's many other things in terms of livestock and the types of things with sophisticated dietary research that have been done, and the types of equipment and various things that uh, increase the productivity and the quality of the meat and the produce and those types of things. So, so this is what we fight for. But when you got a bunch of global corporations that are all being financially run by people who are using scientific breakthroughs as a way to get bigger and to control more and make more money, because the way they're making more money is by having the people, the farmers, make less, or the people buying the food pay more. And you see, that's not the function of the American system. And that's what we're trying to define in terms of getting a credit system where you actually create a situation where the farmers, people get out of debt. You know, it's not.
Can you just explain before we wrap up parity? Why parity? How does this work? What's the history of it? I think that would be very useful because, people are paying a lot of money for food right now.
Yeah.
But it's not going to the farmers.
Yeah. Well, they've done a lot of nice research on that. There's a nice little report called A Brief History of Parity Pricing and the Present Day Ramifications of the Abandonment of a Par Economy. And the basic premise of parity pricing is the belief that the selling price of a product or produce should go up or down in the same amount as the prices of the inputs used in its production. And another way to phrase the idea of parity is the parity price of a particular commodity is the price giving a unit of the commodity a comparable purchasing power to that in the base period. Meaning, the concept of parity is also widely applied in industrial wage contracts as a means of preserving the real value to the labor force. So, what we have now is a situation where, I mean, with the high price of fertilizer and all the tariffs that were put on them, who's paying those tariffs? Well, the people here, right. The farmers. And the point is what's the idea of tariffs? Well, the idea of tariffs is to help develop, something in your own country, but we ain't done that. We ain't set that in motion. So I just heard that Canada announced, and I got to verify this, they're going to stop all potash sales into the U.S., and I think we get 80% of our potash from Canada. Just the fact that that's even being discussed is the disgusting aspect of globalization and the old oligarchy idea of how you do things, and you start throwing stuff around like you're the Godfather and running some sort of mafia operation to threaten people. You do that, and then I'm going to do this. No, the idea is that we sit down because we're human beings and we work for the good to do a good policy so everybody benefits. And the farmer, because he feeds the nation, is a very unique position.
Yeah, and that really brings me back to the Epstein scandal, because if you view human beings as a commodity, particularly children, and worse than a commodity, if you take a sadistic pleasure out of doing harm, then that will affect every area of your policy. And uh, that is what we're seeing. And I think it's time for a major sea change. Helga raised today the question of whether, I'm just muting your mic to get rid of the echo. She raised the question today about whether the leak of the Epstein files was a scheduled leak designed to get rid of one political class for another. Garland Nixon, who's been looking at some of this as a detective, because that's what he was, a crime investigator, said, well, sure, they are. But we should actually look at what they're not saying, which is the ties to the royal family. And, what is the significance of this really? And can we not seize this to get a change where someone like myself, who never met Jeffrey Epstein, never went to on the Lolita Express, was not in these circles, was not a TV show, reality TV host, I'm not a billionaire. Can we get some people like me into office who actually have an interest in changing the policy? I think this is very urgent right now, and I'd like to get your thoughts on all of this mess happening.
Well, this is one of the reasons I introduce people to the Wallace family, okay? Because it's just a unique group of individuals that, I mean, they were up against a lot of stuff because they were denounced by people because they took stands that they fought the railroads, they fought the monopolies, they fought all this, but they also Henry the First was one of the key guys in the nation to set up the oh gosh, my mind just slipped, but where the young kids can go to the gyms and stuff and have fun, YMCA, and but that kind of thing, and the but this is what LaRouche is always focused on, and Helga is how do you develop this so that people at every age of their development, as they grow up, and even as as long as we're alive, we're getting older. So hey, that's good. But the thing is we get the joy of creativity, and of course, music is a very, very big aspect of that creativity. But it's also in other things, and that's why we should have a society where people can develop skills and they've got certain talents and different things that they can use to help each other out in society. And that's what, LaRouche built an organization to teach people the history of this kind of a battle and the various aspects of the cultural fight and the science and the different things, because we got a big universe out there. And like what somebody asked Helga, that there's only one universe, and well, the thing is my God, it's just endless what we could do to develop the technology to go out and check things out, but also inside our own world. But the thing is when you've got people freezing to death in New York City in the United States, that tells you how far we went in the wrong direction.
Yes, and that death toll is now up to 17 people, and it may be this weekend. It'll probably go even higher because we're about to have really bitter, bitter cold, and it is a disgrace that that's happening in the United States of America, in New York City, the city where Wall Street is located, where you have, the the billionaires next to the homeless people experiencing homeless, as we say it. So I think we should wrap up. I want to thank you for doing what you do. I would like to urge people who are listening, if you are a U.S. citizen or a green card holder, a permanent resident, you are legally allowed to donate to my campaign. And my campaign urgently needs funds. I do not get money from AIPAC. I'm not planning to. And I do not have a super PAC because I don't want money or help from unknown sources who are trying to buy me off, which means I need a whole lot of people putting in your $10, $20, $50, and $3,500. So thank you very much, Bob. We're going to talk again,
Yes.
and we're going to talk with the farm leaders that you're assembling and work on getting the policy changes that we need, even before I get to the White House, if possible.
Good. That sounds great.
Thank you very much.
And we'll all sing "Done, Done."
Yes, we will. Yes. And thank you for singing. People were impressed with your voice, I saw in the comments.
Okay.
All right. Take
Thank
care.
you. Bye.
Bye.